Today we are going to look at how Indian writing in English, or which we roughly call as Indian English literature, how that actually plays out. What are the concepts that are associated with such a cultural and literary phenomenon? And what are the who are the major writers basically that we need to consider before we take up this examination? I will present a PowerPoint like the last day. So, yeah, right. So today's the topic is, as I said, it is history of Indian writing in English. First of all, we are calling it Indian writing in English because, uh, unlike Australian literature or American English literature or Irish literature, which is definitely a part of global English literature, it is still debatable in today's academic circle whether Indian English literature can actually be called, Indian English literature as such. I mean, a part of proper English literature, though of course that has a colonial construct to it. There is a delegitimizing process which is at work, but till now scholars opine that we are still somehow getting close to the idea of a proper English literary corpus in the Indian milieu. So it is safer to call it Indian writing in English. Of course, this also talks about novels which actually are offered to us in the form of English translations. So for our safety, we will call it Indian writing in English, though calling Indian English Indian English literature is not really valuable, so as to say. But what are the social and historical conditions on which we can find English language and English education gaining ground in India? Of course, India has a colonial legacy. That is not There is not much to say about that. But we will just look around and into the kind of small events that shaped and kind of promoted English learning in India. Of course, I mean, all of us know that somehow the language English is an instrument of power in today's society, specifically in India, and it has an idea of elitism that is associated with it, for good or for bad. Right. So the first historical situation that we look into is the Battle of Plassey. I think most of us who have read Indian history know about it. The Battle of Plassey actually happens in the year 1757, where it was between Nawab Sirajuddaulah in Bengal and Robert Clive, of course, and it was won by the Britishers. And the vast region, I mean, the Bengal definitely was the leading territorial region when it comes to economy at that point of time, and that was handed over to the East India Company. Uh, with that, we have this understanding of English being a language of power. That is the very first, historical moment when English was touted to become the medium of power in near future. But there are two very different strains of thought which was running at that point of time, and we'll look at that. First, we find cultural discoveries by the British. The Britishers were more actually interested in knowing what kind of what kind of literature or what kind of cultural value system Indians had. Of course, Indian value system was extremely complex because we know if we go back to our own history, we'll see there was a very long Hindu period of rule, and then we have Muslim rule in India. So our culture was very syncretic. We don't really have a proper homogeneous culture. We never had that, to be honest. So now what happens over here is that it becomes really difficult for the Britishers to understand what kind of culture Indians have. Now, why was it important for the Britishers to know about Indian culture? They were colonizers after all. But the point is, unless and until a particular colony and its culture is explored and is dissected and analyzed, you can't really. I mean, it's almost impossible to kind of rule over them. You have to know your objects. Let's say social and historical background, literary literary background, belief systems, all of that to understand what is, I mean, savagery, as I was talking about in that American class, and what is civilization. So for the British to rule over India, the vast territory of India, it was important for them to know what Indian society or culture stood for. That was the main reason why Britishers wanted to study Indian society. I mean, it is similar to Michel Foucault's understanding of power. He says that unless and until you understand where the the let's say which are the powerful points that lie in your opponent and with your opponent, and which other lines of fallibility won't actually be able to control them. The same thing was talked about by Freud when it comes to psychoanalytics. So it is a function of power basically. We have the foundation of the Asiatic Society in Bengal, of course, in Calcutta in 1784. That Asiatic Society was actually founded by Sir William Jones, H.T. Colebrooke, who penned the Digest of Hindu Laws on Contracts and Succession, coming out in the year 1797, 1798, and James Prinsep, who was also the discoverer to the Ashokan inscriptions. Now, all of them took a lot of interest in knowing Indian culture, as I was talking about, and they could have been called the Orientalists in a way. For them, it was important to know how Indian philosophy, Indian system, and Indian superstition as well worked for them to penetrate into Indian society. British learning of Indian past was mainly to comprehend Indian political and cultural development, to identify subjects and their desires, concerns, as I was talking about. Then we have the establishment of Calcutta Madarsa in 1781 by Warren Hastings, and simultaneously we have another Sanskrit college which is being established in Benares, which was done by Jonathan Duncan in the year 1792. So what is important for us to understand here is that we don't really have the Britishers coming in India and imposing English language as a language of power right from the onset. What happens is a cultural phenomenon that actually goes in the reverse direction. We find there is a cultural phenomenon where the English were actually willing to know Persian language, Arabic language, Sanskrit language, Devanagari script for their understanding of how to colonize us. So it was a cultural phenomenon in quite the reverse direction at the onset. The Britishers, they deemed spreading of English education important for effective governance and to further the civilizing mission. This is where things get changed, things get steam. After conquering Bengal and then rest of India, we had different presidencies, of course, the Bombay presidency, the Madras presidency, the Bengal presidency, and the Awadh presidency, in the north. But so as to say, what is important for us to remember is that at that point, it became important for the Britishers to understand that there is a lot of confusion in Indian society, given the kind of superstitions and the kind of ritualistic practices that operated both within the Hindu society and the Muslim society. So for them, it was important to codify. This idea of codifying legal testaments is basically a Western concept. I mean, it was very difficult for Hindu society and even Islamic society to have very, very codified laws. Though we had the conception of laws, of course, Arthashastra gives us one idea, the Sharia law has another idea, but this very secular codification, so as to say, that comes with the British in India. For them, it was important to introduce, different competitive examinations like the civil services and other kind of examinations where Indian people could actually, become a part of the, let's say, of the entire ruling apparatus. Now, why was it important for to hire Indian people? It was important because Indian people understood Indian temperament much better than the British. So, if there is a scope of rebellion, if there is a scope of, let's say, Indian people rising up in arms, it is the Indian governors or the, let's say, the Indian civil servants who would understand that better than any Britishers could have. So that was important for them to actually, play the inclusion card. I won't say it's inclusion, but to play a certain amount of card, to kind of imbibe more and more Indians, educated Indians in the civil services. So that was the time when Britishers understood that they need a homogeneous language. Another problem is that India, even today, we have a multicultural, multilingual society. So it becomes very difficult for the Britishers to understand how to rule over India when there are so many languages operating together in the Indian mainland. So for them, English became a language of homogenization, of control and power, after they understood how Sanskrit and Persian and Arabic languages work in Indian society. So this comes later. This is something which we need to remember when we talk about the chronology. Um, Indian society, as I said, was deeply sectarian and superstitious. Now, liberal Indians played a very important role. We will just come to that in a couple of slides. But liberal Indians were the ones who actually, they started, kind of nurturing themselves with Western education. They read about the French Revolution, they read about the American movement of independence, and other European movements. And then they understood that it is important to actually liberate India from these superstitious structures which was prevalent at that point of time. So liberal Indians also joined hands with a section of British. They welcomed British culture to make India a more liberal land, so as to say. That is the very first conception that we understand from this slide. The next slide. Uh, Most resonant of these liberal Indians was, of course, Raja Ram Mohan Roy. I'm sure most of us know about his name. He opposed, which is very striking, is that he opposed the establishment of Sanskrit colleges and madrasas. He was against the establishment of any college or any system of education which actually catered to Indian form of learning, because it was deeply religious. Like both Sanskrit college and madrasas, they had a religious form of education, so as to say. So, and he was against that. He was trying to look at the secular basis of, let's say, of ethics as such. Uh, he actually kind of ruled, and he tried to kind of frame a movement in favor of English education. He wrote a very famous letter which is called Letter on English Education, which was addressed to Lord Armhurst, who was then Governor General of Bengal, and it's Bengal at large was not. I mean, India was still a distant dream. I mean, the entire Indian landscape. But this is something which you need to remember. There were liberal scholars like Raja Ram Mohan Roy who actually wanted more English, learning. I think there was a very famous treatise which I have not mentioned on the slide, but he actually talks. I mean, in the letter he actually writes, and he says that if Baconian system of thought was not introduced in the English society in the 16th century, then probably English society would have also been in the same state that Indian society was in at that point of time, because it was Bacon's inductive method of reasoning that actually brought in the idea of enlightenment in the British land. The same thing happens over here as well. He says that English language and English values are important for us to liberate, let's say, the superstitions that plague Indian society. Um, which is very important again, that Raja Rammohn Roy, he worked with David Hume to establish an association which promoted Western education, and that happens in the year 1816, so which is the early 19th century, leads to the formation of Hindu College, which is now known as Presidency College or University in Calcutta. That happens in 1817. Anglo-Hindu School, which later comes to be known as the David Hare School, that happens in 1822. And all these, I mean, both the Hindu College and the Anglo-Hindu School catered to secular learning, with English as the basis of communication, the medium of communication. Next, of course, this is a very, this is a landmark in the history of Indian English literature or political landscape and cultural landscape as such. We have Tom Macaulay. I'm sure most of us have heard about him. He's famous or infamous in different ways. He kind of writes and publishes this treaty called The Minutes, which comes out in the year 1835. Specifically, the date is 7th March 1835. He mentions in the minutes that the great objective of the British government ought to be the promotion of European literature and science among natives of America and India, of course. That was also a point. And all funds for this purpose will be best employed for English education alone. So the same kind of thought comes into being, which Radha Ram Mohan Roy was talking about. But now it was getting a legal status, which is important for us to understand. He threatened to resign from the Governor General's Council if his recommendations are not being accepted. And at that time, the Governor General, he was Sir William Bentinck. He actually complied, and he kind of made it a law that every form of education in India will be the European form of education. It will promote English language, and no other form of language, be it Sanskrit or Arabic or Persian or any other regional language, that will not be given a proper legal or official status. This is where English really becomes the language of power in India. So this is a landmark for us to remember. It happens on the 7th of March, 1835, called the Minutes. Uh, Coming from the pens of Tom Macaulay. This is very important for even for the MCQ and for general conception as well. Next, we come to the. I'm trying to cover every single major writer in Indian English writing. So the first, of course, writer would be Raja Ram Mohan Roy, 1772 to 1833. Aryan Tagore, most of us, I think all of us know about him. We have heard about his name. Aryan Tagore described him as the inaugurator of modern age in India. So he was the father of, let's say, Indian modernism or Indian English learning, both. He edited the Brahmanical magazine, which was in English, 1821 to 1833. Sambat Kaumudi came out in Bengali in the year 1821, and Mirat ul Akbar, which came out in Persian in the year 1822, ran till 1823. The English works of Raja Rammohn Roy, sorry for that, lowercase thing. The English works of Raja Rammohn Roy comes out in 6 volumes. during the period 1945 to 51. It was published in the year 1945 to 51. He actually had a lot of scanty writing at that point of time, but the entire compilation and publication took, that of course happened in the 20th century. It was edited by Kalidas Nag and Devachoti Borman. So this might be an important question for MCQ. When was it first published, in a compilation form? So this is the answer to that. Um, there are 32 essays in English. Of them, the most prominent are an abridgment of the Vedas, renderings of Kena and Isha Upanishad, a defense of Hindu theism. This was, in fact, written in response to an abridgment of Vedant. It was written by some Shankara Shastri or someone who actually talked about Vedant, and he promulgated the idea of polytheism. Now, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, those of us know about his background would know that he was a Brahmo. He belonged to the Brahmo Samaj, and Brahmo Samaj believed in Nirakar, or formless kind of worship, and they were against idol worship or Vigraha worship, and they believed in monotheism. So these are very important points. So his idea, like his defense of Hindu theism, was completely on lines of monotheistic behavior or monotheistic religious practice. A second defense of monotheistical system of worship also came out soon, I think within 2 years. Also, he studied, Latin and Hebrew scriptures. He studied a bit of Judaism. He studied Christianity, and he actually wrote a treatise called The Precepts of Jesus, which comes out in the year 1819 to 1821. So one thing we have to keep in mind is that though Raja Rammohn Roy was a liberal, of course, but he was very, very invested into the study of both Hindu, Upanishadic system in particular, because if you read Upanishads talks about monotheism to a certain extent. So Upanishadic thing becomes important. He also reads different religions, especially Christianity and Judaism, and he was not a scholar, but he was a well-read person in those texts as well. Um of course, there were other treatises which pertain to the cultural dimension. Opponent of the practice of burning widows alive. All of us know that he actually played a very, very important role in banning the idea of the no, the social practice of sati. 1818. Second conference 1820, that was again written in complement, as a complementary treatise to kind of fighting against the practice of sati, or burning widows alive. Also, he wrote something called Against Hindu Law of Inheritance, where the female children, I mean the daughters, they were actually not allowed to inherit the property of their fathers. It was a patrilineal society; it still is. But then women did not have the right to inherit property. So he wrote a treatise against that as well. So here you can find his bent of mind was really liberal and probably radical if you consider in that particular historical frame, right? Um, Next, we come to his outright political, treatises. He writes something like petitions against the press regulations. So at that point of time, we know that Indian newspapers, it started towards it actually had it, kind of articles being written in certain magazines and journals by the end of the, let's say, 18th century. 19th century saw a proliferation of it. I mean, of course, he himself edited two or three, journals, as I was talking about, and newspapers as well. So he actually wrote against the press regulations which were being imposed by the British. Whenever there was some idea of dissent, some idea of actually fighting against the British, some kind of criticism which was directed towards the British government, we see that I mean the Britishers actually were quite high-handed in that way, to kind of come down heavily on the people who are writing, the authors of those articles and journals. So he wrote against it. He wrote a letter to Sir Bentinck, again talking about press regulations and talking about the general state of education in the country of India. Often, Raja Ram Mohan Roy has been slotted by modern scholars as to be belonging to the period of literature of knowledge. So there are two kinds of literature as such. One is literature of knowledge. The other one is literature of power. Raja Ram Mohan Roy was not included in the idea of literature of power. Literature of power anyway is heavily political, but Raja Ram Mohan Roy went, he had a very moderate stand. I mean, though he was radical towards Indian society and liberal and his liberal ideology, but he took a moderate stance when it came to the when dealing with the Britishers. I mean, even if you go back to the history of congressmen, I mean, international congress, we'll see that the first, I mean, it comes up in the late, I think, yeah, 19th century. At that point of time, 1885, 1886, you will find that most Congress leaders were moderates. They did not actually go into direct confrontations with the Britishers. So the same kind of, I mean, it's a very, very early symptom of being a little moderate with the Britishers. And why was he moderate? He was moderate because he thought that British education and English education was very important to modernize India as a society. So that was one of the reasons. So his basically his oeuvre of literature belongs to the literature of knowledge and not power. This is something which might be important. Also, his literary style has often been compared to Edmund Burke. Of course, we know about Edmund Burke. He was a conservative. He was ironically a conservative, philosopher. He wrote against French Revolution. He supported the idea of monarchy, though with certain checks and balances. His literary style was extremely florid. It was ornamental. It was very descriptive. If you read Edmund Burke, of course, Raja Ram Mohan Roy also had a similar kind of literary style. His writings were kind of exquisite, elaborated, and it dealt with us with a bit of lucidity. It was not kind of polemical. It was not directly attacking anyone. So that is something which we might remember when we talk about the literary style of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Next up is Henry Louis Vivian de Rosio, and his dates are 1809 to 1831. Of course, he was an Anglo-Portuguese. He also, he had journalism. He was a student of journalism initially, and he edited a paper called the Parthian. This might be important. These things come in the net examination as well. So he edited a paper called the Parthian. He discussed Hindu superstitions like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, the state of women. Of course, he talked about widow remarriage, which of course was not legalized by then. It happens much later, but he talked about sati, and he also wrote certain tracts which kind of advocated widow remarriage, and in general the possibilities of women being sent to universities to kind of garner and kind of, let's say, benefit from education, like European education. It was not easy for women to actually go for European education at that point of time. He also wrote parallelly against British oppression. He was a person who sympathized and empathized with his Indian identity, and he wrote against the colonial rule of the British. Of course, another paper he started with the daily called the East Indian. This was started by him, so there is a fundamental difference. The Parthian was being edited by De Rosio. He did not start the paper, but he himself was the founder of the East Indian. So there is a difference. So we might keep that in mind. Uh, Two volumes of poetry, poems coming out in 1827, and the name is also its eponymous poems. The Fakir of Jangira, which is kind of an important, it's kind of an epical, not epical, but semi-epical tale, a metrical tale, and other poems. Other poems which might be important, of course, De Rosio wrote a lot of sonnets. I mean, those of us who have read De Rosio would know he has written a lot of sonnets, so as to say. Of these, the important poems are Sonnet to the Moon, The Golden Vase, Sonnet, Death, and Best Friend. He had an inclination towards inquiring about life, about death, about finality. So all that comes over here is that his language is sentimental, elaborate imagery, metrical consonants, romantic diction. Of course, I mean, again, I mean, I don't think it would be too far fetched to understand that why someone like Diderot was writing in a romantic diction at that point of time. Even in British, I mean, in Britain as such, we have the romantic movement at its peak. I mean, it was slowly dying. The second generation romantics had taken over. So the same thing, you find the same kind of sentimentality, imagery. I mean, romanticism also deals with imagery. There is metrical consonance, which might, I mean, even in romanticism, that's important from a different angle. I mean, of classicism is much more arid in that way. But romanticism is a different way to understand assonance and consonance. The same thing was there in his language. Also, his diction was romantic. So this is something which we might, kind of remember. The Fakir of Jangir, as I said, it's a very important poem. It was an epic tale of a widow called Nalini, who is saved from the funeral pyre by a robber whom she loves back. So there is this robber who actually saves her from from committing the sati pratha, and she returns his love. There is a clash with relatives of the woman, of course, and they reclaim her. And there is a fight that happens, and the lover, I mean the robber, he dies in the fight. And there is this mystical, almost transcendental understanding of there is some kind of reunion happening in afterlife. That idea of romanticism, transcendence, that also plays a vital role in this particular epical tale as well. His prosody or metrical division was in iambic tetrameter. Specifically, iambic tetrameter was applied in couplets. I mean, I think most of us know what couplets are, right? I mean, the last two rhyming verses of a poem or a stanza, right? So iambic tetrameter was applied in couplets. Anapaestic meter was applied for warfare. Of course, anapaestic meter has, if you hear it, it has a sound of, it has a jingling sound. So that is suitable for the warfare. He used it. Dactylic was used in funeral scenes. Most of us who actually would remember poetry and the origins of elegiac poetry, elegy as such. Elegy was actually written in dactylic pentameter initially. So, for the funeral scenes, he chooses dactylic meter as such. Uh, Also, as I said, he was an anti-colonial crusader. He wrote nationalist poetry, quote unquote. To India, my native land. Many of us might have read it in our school text, all of that. The Harp of India, to the pupils of Hindu College. I mean, to the pupils of Hindu College is a poem, but it is addressed to the to the students that he taught. He was, of course, a teacher in the Hindu College, the Presidency College, and he actually called upon them to become proper human beings and take part in kind of, let's say, redeeming India's glory as such. Also becoming a liberal in not only in actions, I mean, in the sense that not only rhetoric but also in actions. Highest Himalaya, of course, that Himalaya is the totem or symbolic, let's say, representation of India as a landmass. So highest Himalaya also is an important poem. The other one is Ganga style. I mean, read, you see either India or one of its important landscapes are always mentioned in the title of these poems. So you understand that there is an understanding of, let's say, patriotism, if not blatant nationalism, but there was an anti-colonial trail to it, nevertheless. Uh, yeah. Next, we go to Michael Madhusudan Dutt. Of course, he's quite famous in Bengal. He started his career writing in English poetry, English language, not very successful, and then he turned towards Bengali language, and he became quite reputed in Bengali literature. But however, we'll look at his English poem. Uh, I mean, poems. So the first important poem that he writes is "The Captive Lady." It's called "The Captive Lady." That comes out in the year 1849. It is a long poem that narrates the story of Rajput King Prithviraj, who abducts the princess of Kannauj and his battle with the Muslim invaders, where he dies with his wife, who commits a sati pratha. It was not extremely, historically accurate. It was not. I mean, of course, you can take, the liberty of, taking up poetic license when you're writing any kind of fiction or poetry. He also did the same thing. It was more like a colorful imagination of it. The same thing that we hear for Padmavati, that kind of a story, and that was written in iambic pentameter. The other poem which is important is called Visions of the Past. It dwells on the Christian theme of original sin and redemption of man. It has a Miltonic quality, of course. I mean, he actually followed Milton. This might be important for us to note that Michael Madhusudan Dutt was actually a person who converted himself to Christianity, and he followed Milton's writing skills. Milton was one of his models when it came to literary writings. He had a Miltonic quality, used it's blank meter, basically. It's not version, but blank meter. Also used a lot of Latin inversions. I mean, Latin inversions are the hallmark of Christian poetry, Christian confessional poetry, or epical poetry. Though epic doesn't really fit in the Christian idea of poetry, but you do find Latinized inversions even in Milton. I mean, Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, the same thing. Derivative verse in the sense it doesn't really appear to be extremely spontaneous. That was one of the main reasons why Michael Madhusudan, that he could not actually succeed as an English poet. He was not very spontaneous with his writings. I mean, it was very, let's say, it was very arid. It was very artificial in certain ways. Um, so that is one point we might, kind of remember for Madhusudan Dutt. He was also employing moments of Johnsonese. People, I mean, for those of us who know a bit of rhetoric, will know that Johnsonese, is the usage of, very, let's say, flamboyant and kind of, terms which are extremely difficult to kind of comprehend and to remember. Like, let us kind of allude to Shashi Tharoor. He uses a lot of words which are very bombastic, as to say. So the same thing. He uses words which are a little difficult for even readers to understand, even Christian readers to understand, for that matter. And he also used a lot of Latin. Anyway, Latin makes the language a little more difficult. So these are his traits when it comes to literary writing. His important plays are Ratnavali, Sharmishta, Is This Called Civilization? Is This Called Civilization is a play which actually looks at the clash of Indian, let's say, of course, Indian and Western civilization. He wanted to see what are the contradictions playing out in the Indic society as opposed to the Western notion of liberalism. So he critiqued Indian society, but he was also a little skeptical of certain Western, but let's say Western systems of thought. He settled in India later, of course, and he was writing in Bengali. So there was a point where he was not very let's say allured towards European society like he did when he started off writing. So that is something which might we might remember, that this particular play is important because it deals with the civilizational clashes. Sharmishta is again it's almost a drama which kind of talks about an epic. There is a character called Sharmishta in Indian legend, in Hindu legend. He talks about Sharmishta in that way. It is completely embellishing. It's just almost following the ancient Sanskrit dramatists. Ratnavali is also, of course, a particular play which follows a similar tradition of talking about Indian legends of Menakas and Apsaras, things like that. And of course, there are elements of, let's say, kingly conquests. If you read Sanskrit drama, you will see that every time there is a heroic conquest by a particular ruler of a particular region, it is always, kind of paralleled, and there is always a comparison drawn to let's say Indra. I mean the Hindu king, I mean Hindu god Indra, and certain kind of mythology. So that is present in Michael Mulson Datta as well. We'll go next to Torudat. Torudat is a very important figure in Indian English poetry. Very, very important. She's also, of course, she's a female writer also. Indian English poetry is said to mature and graduate. I mean, the simple word graduate speaks volumes. So she is said to, actually, make Indian English poetry come of age. Till now, whatever poetry we were seeing, they were either, being blatant emulation of the Western model, or there was a moment of artifice, some kind of derivative language. All of that was playing up. But for Toru, that we find spontaneity in the language. She actually was in home with the English language. That is something which we might remember. She's the pioneer of Indian English poetry as such. Her father described her as puny and elf-like, disheveled tresses, self-willed and shy. By the way, Toru, that actually she got her education in France. She went to France and she learned French for about 5 6 years, and then she went to Britain. She did not find a very good treatment in Britain as such, and she was a little hopeless. She came back to India, and that ambivalent attitude towards the Western civilization and Indian cultural ethos plays throughout her not poetry, but in her little scanty diary writing, or that kind of non-fiction writing, whatever little scanty writing is available. As I said, the next point actually talks about it. Yeah, she was ambivalent. She had an ambivalent attitude towards England. She said that I still want to be there. So she wanted to be in England. She wanted to follow the, let's say, um, the kind of livelihood and let's say the general cultural atmosphere that English life had with them. There is an element of mimicry, which we say in the post-colonial, term. In England, again, when she was settled in England, she talked about India, and she says that the free life we led there. So she was nostalgic. She wanted to come back to India. So she was very, she was torn apart between Indian, civilization or home in India, and the lures of European culture and let's say liberty that comes along. Um, but there were actually moments where she actually wrote letters to even British people in India and said that we are treated as second class citizens in our own country. There have been certain letters which are not very well digitized and codified, but nevertheless they are present in bits and parts. Her most important poetic collection is a chef gleaned in French fields, which comes out in the year 1876. It has 165 French poems. As I said, that she actually got her education in France, and she actually learned French for about 5 years, and she wrote all these poems in French. I'm sorry, he actually kind of sorry, he actually kind of she actually kind of noted down all these poems in French by French poets. They were actually poems which are written by poets like Baudelaire and and so on and so forth. And she kind of got a list of almost 165 poems which are written in French, and she translated them to English. So she was very very well versed with French to a certain extent, but her job was translation. She did not write French poetry. She translated French poetry. Edmund Guzet, of course, he becomes a very important. He plays a very important role in Fondé movement. I mean, if you know continental literature and continental cultural, movement, you will remember that Fondé movements happens towards the end of the 19th century, right? It starts with let's say aestheticism, decadence movement, symbolism, imagism, and so on and so forth. So Edmund Guzet was a part of the symbolist movement, and he was a very close associate of Arthur Symons. Edmund Guzey, he described her work as the wonderful something that contains wonderful collection of strength and weaknesses. So again, probably the strength and weakness both are playing because of our ambivalent attitude towards the language English itself and the civilizational ethos that kind of tears her apart mentally. So this is important. I'm just quoting people, important people who have spoken about these writers, because at least in net, if not in JNU, you do get these questions. Who said this thing, and those kind of questions. Also, she wrote the ancient ballads and legends of Hindustan in 1882, which is very important, and that deals with mythical characters like Prahlad, Lakshman, Sita, Savitri, Dhruva. The King Bharat, the character of Mahabharat, which has a dramatic and epical quality. So we can see that there is a progression. I mean, if not a progression, there is a transformation in the kind of content she was writing. She started with translating French verses. She started being more allured towards the English or the continental, let's say, content or civilization as such. But later she took on Indian, kind of Indian mythical themes, uh, which Indian people connect to, which becomes a part of our collective unconscious, so as to say. So that becomes important. Also, of course, when you're dealing with subjects like Prahlad, Lakshman, Sita, you have a dramatic quality. Every epic has an inherent dramatic quality. Whenever you have conflict, you have drama. I mean, I'm quoting G.B. Shaw. So the same thing happens over here as well. You have dramatic quality. There is an epical quality. All very high placed, mythical characters. So the idea of epic also comes into being. She was writing in Victorian diction, which is not very strange. Again, look at her dates: 1856 to 1877. 1832 was when Queen Victoria ascends to the throne. So again, very well, we can observe how continental or how British literature in particular was actually influencing Indian writing in English. She has taken over the Victorian diction. Before we see Madhusudhan or Dirozio, specifically Dirozio, he was writing in romantic diction. So you see a transformation in diction as well with the change of the cultural era in Britain. Um, she was using regular meters, which means pentameter. And of course, her famous poem is "Our Casual and a Tree." I think most of us might have read this in our school, textbooks. This particular poem, it deals with a nostalgic family portrait of her cousins, her siblings, sorry, her siblings, and a tree and some baboon and the kind of beautiful orchard and morning, things like that. It has a romantic quality, of course. So this is all about Toru Dutt. Next, we quickly shift to Ramesh Chandra Dutt. Of course, Ramesh Chandra Dutt was related to Toru Dutt. His dates are 1848 to 1909. He was the cousin of Toru Dutt. He was a part of the Dutt family album along with Toru Dutt. So there is a conception of the Dutt family album in Indian English literature. Specifically, the most true prominent writers that we are covering and which we need to know for our examination is Toru Dutt and Ramesh Chandra Dutt. Okay, and there are other minor writers as well who belong to the same family. They were the extended family as such. They are cousins or they're somehow related, like nephews and nieces, but they together formed the Dutt family album. For us, it's important to know that these two characters play the most vital role when we talk about the Dutt family album in Indian English writing. um, we have Ramesh Chandra Dutt coming out with the Lays of Ancient India, 1894, which is a translation of Sanskrit and Prakrit verses. Of course, most of us know Sanskrit, language was actually, let's say, a very, very religious, ritualistic language. Prakrit was more commonplace that way. But the translations included Vedas, it included Upanishads, it included the epic Ramayana and Mahabharata, and Dhammapadas. Dhammapadas is, of course, a Buddhist, sacred text. So all of that was being translated. So you see that the preoccupation, or let's say the kind of not obsession, but the kind of content that they were dealing with, more or less. Toru Dutt in the later stage of her life, Ramesh Chandra Dutt, but Toru Dutt died quite early, by the way. She died by the age of 21 due to consumption. But anyway, towards the later stage of her literary career, for Ramesh Chandra Dutt, he started his literary career with Indian mythical themes. So the idea of India and Indian, let's say, epic, Indian myth, anything that is anti-colonizing in a way, which goes against the Britishers, those values were being taken, recreated, reread, and reinterpreted. So that is something which we might keep in mind. Um, and all these translations, they do not actually translate the entire, let's say, Ramayana or Mahabharata as such. It's huge. So what he does is actually he takes up selected and important events from each narrative. So be it Ramayana, he takes up the more important episodes. Be it Mahabharata, he takes up the more important episodes. From Upanishads, let's say Kena Upanishad, Isha Upanishad, Atre Upanishads, which are more important. He takes up those kind of let's say literary texts, and he kind of let's say he recycles them and he translates them in the way he wants to. I mean, of course, translation is again, I mean, it is relative to a certain extent, the kind of translation that you indulge in. But he did almost literal translation of the same. Also, he employed the Locksley Hall meter, which is the Anustuk, meter in Indian language. It is, I think, dactylic in a certain way. I don't remember the exact metrical form, but it is dactylic. Locksley Hall meter was employed by Ramesh Chandra Dutt at that point of time, and dactylic meter, as I said, it has an elegiac quality, but it also might have an heroic quality, because if you see, I think the epic system, epic was iambic pentameter to start with, but there were verses in epics as well where dactylic hexameter was followed by dactylic pentameter. So probably he was trying to locate these kind of metrical divisions in that perspective, from that perspective. Also, he writes non-fiction like The Pageantry of Bengal. This is complete non-fiction, out and out. I mean, we were talking about the literature of power and literature of knowledge. This falls under the category of literature of power. The Pageantry of Bengal, the economic history of India, or let's say something that Dadabhai Naroji wrote about the brain drain theory in India. Those actually fall under literature of power, and because they actually took on economic problems and social problems head on. They did not moderate their stances. So Ramesh Chandra Dutt is one person who actually wrote non-fiction from that tradition, literature of power as such. Yeah. We go to Manmohan Ghosh, 1869 to 1924, the turn of the 20th century. His most important work is Primavera. It is again a poem, which it includes, I mean, works of Stephen Phillips, Arthur Cripps, and Lawrence Binion. I mean, all of them are very established writers in Europe who also took a lot of tours to India, and they were interested in, the Indian culture and let's say the Orientalist discovery and exploration. So he collaborated with them. He included their poems and their, I think, mainly poems in the collection called Primavera. It has aesthetic colorfulness, a sense of romantic longing, natural landscapes as themes. I mean, till now, whenever we talk about this mythical and epical characters, we know that when we are dealing with mythical and epical characters, there has to be a certain amount of colorfulness, a certain amount of grandiose, let's say, execution of those themes. The same thing happens here as well. But since it is not, particularly epical themes, there is an element of romantic longing, a point of subjectivity. So generally in epic, you don't really have subjectivity; you have an objective focus, but you have a romantic, I mean, a subjective focus in non-epical, let's say, systems of literature. So same thing happens over here. Songs of love and death, you can very well understand now why we are talking about romantic longing, love and death, that kind of transcendental inquiry that becomes a part of his writings as well. 1926, philosophical experimentation with theme of love and European movements. Monmouth Ghosh, as I said, he was writing with Stephen Phillips, Cripps, and Binion. So at that point of time, all these writers in Europe were also a part of those various movements: aestheticism, decadence, symbolism, imagism, vorticism, cubism. All that comes one after the other. So, I mean, these writers influenced Monmohan Ghosh to a uh, large extent. He actually followed themes of love, but from an experimental attitude. Now, if you read through these particular movements, you will see that even they express love. They talk about different perspectives. For instance, Cubism talks about different perspectives, but at that point of time, you will see the way they were talking about love was very different from the, let's say, corny, stereotypical way, people expressed romantic thoughts. It was more experimental. I mean, not metaphysical, but it was experimental to a certain extent. The kind of allusions that were made, the kind of allegory that was used, metaphors, similes, all that, those were actually probably, for example, if you take up a romantic idea with a scientific discovery, of course, it's kind of it hears to be extremely metaphysical in a way, but these kind of workings did play a very important part at that particular time as well. And there is an element of painting, of being extremely elaborate with your description, because all these movements, cubism, decadence, symbolism, all of them had, and I mean, they all probably all of them had their initiation from painters. I mean, painters. That is important for us to remember. So even in their literary language, we have a quality of, let's say, a descriptive quality, an aesthetic quality, which is of course suiting the Victorian temper as well, and it also suits the Fondesical temper. The next uh, compilation of poetry that we come across is Orphic Mysteries, coming out in 1918, Immortal Eve, coming out in 1919. And both these collection of poems, they were very very lyrical, almost elegiac. They were written on the death of his wife. This might be important for your MCQ, because he actually writes this almost following the in memoriam tradition of Tennyson. So that is something which we might remember. Orphic Mysteries and Immortal Eve. Uh, Next, there is another epic called the Perseus the Gorgon Slayer. That is the name of the epic, 1898. Promethean narrative, progress of human civilization, as long as 7,500 lines. So it's vast. It is a proper epic. Also, it has a Promethean narrative. I mean, whenever you read the title of the play, sorry, the epic Perseus the Gorgon Slayer, you will kind of think about the myth of the Prometheus, because a lot of people were writing Prometheus Unbound, and those kind of plays were actually coming out during the Romantic period. So that probably had an influence on Monmohan Ghosh as well, because he was writing a Promethean narrative, a narrative where good triumphs over evil, and how human civilization progresses, beating that evil. The same theme has been taken up with a different name altogether. Here the name is Perseus, the Gorgon Slayer. Gorgon is probably the totemic representation of evil in this particular epic. So that is something which we might remember. Next is Nolo and Damayanti, 1916. We know the story of Nolo and Damayanti. Of course, it is a part of the Indian legendary system, mythic system. And this was a verse drama, by the way. It was not an epic. This was a verse drama coming out in 1916. Note that all kinds of dramas that were being written were not prose dramas. Most of them were verse. So the idea of poetry becomes central to dealing with epical and mythical themes again. And at that point, we don't really have a lot of prosaic structure of language. Even in continental literature, if you talk about in British literature or those kind of literature, you will see that poetry actually comes before prose makes its appearance. The same thing here. Poetry still dominates the milieu. It still kind of becomes a very important instrument even in dramatic endeavors. Yeah. The other lyrical drama, I can see there's a verse drama, there is another lyrical drama. Lyrical drama is, again, it has a poetic feeling to it. It is incomplete, by the way, important for your MCQ. It comes out in the year 1918. It is called Adam Alarmed in Paradise. It deals with original sin, the fall of Adam, the wrath of God, the Garden of Eden, all of that. So once he's talking about Nolo and Damayanti, which is the Indian, of course, system of myth. The other one is the, let's say, the Judaic or the Christian idea of religion. So that also plays a very important role over here. Right. So we will shift to Aurobindo Ghosh, 1870 to 1950. He is very well known. I'm sure we talk about Rishi Aurobindo as such as Sri Aurobindo. He is Aurobindo Ghosh. He is the brother of Monmohan Ghosh, actually. He is a nationalist, he's a mystic, he's a poet and a playwright. He writes short poems. I mean, of course, his poems come together in a compilation called Short Poems in 1890 to 1900. That was the time when he was actually writing scanty poems whimsically. So those all were collected together by the end of by the end of the 1890s, and they came out in 1900, almost 1900, in bits and parts. He has themes of romance, themes of love, of sorrow, of death and liberty. Also, I mean, it's not that only they follow the Indian tradition of love, sorrow, death, transcendence, spirituality, Upanishadic system. They also look at continental literature, specifically the origin of continental literature, which is Greek literature. They also, I mean, let's say Orpheus and Eurydice. I mean, I think even Aurobindo Ghosh wrote a particular poem on Orpheus and Eurydice. And writing about Orpheus and Eurydice goes back in even in British literature, as someone like during the Chaucer's period, right? I mean, after Chaucer, Robert Henryson and all, they were writing on Orpheus and Eurydice or something. So the same thing happens over here. He is dealing with also continental themes. So you see, throughout Indian literature, you find there is always a juxtaposition I won't call it a conflict, that would be an overstatement, but there is always a juxtaposition between Indian ethos and Indian systems of thought as against Western culture. So there is always a parallel, let's say a kind of a dialectic running between Indian mythic system and Western mythic system. So that is important for us to remember. I mean, to note actually, conceptually. There is another poetic collection called the Envoy, where he talks about the Indian rivers. The idea of futility and fertility as well, futility of life, fertility of the lands. Talks about Ganges and Saraswati, deals with redemption of moksha, these kind of themes. That is, I mean, of course, Aurobindo was a religious and a spiritual person, so needless to talk about it. He also wrote sonnets called A Dream of Surrealist Science. There is another sonnet which is important called Transformation. Actually, Transformation is a particular sonnet which deals with how he, from being only a political activist, also saw the spiritual angle in the Indian national movement. So that is important. Transformation is an important sonnet. It deals with the mystic experiences in life, as I was talking about. His other long poems, which are important, are Urvasi, which deals with it's a tale of a celestial maiden. I think most of us know who Urvasi is, and a love of King Pururavas. 1500 lines of blank verse. It is an emulation, a mimetic representation of Kalidasa's Vikramarsha. There's a particular drama called Vikramarsha, and that was actually put into the poetic form by the name of Urvashi, and the theme was almost the same. The other important poem long poem that we need to remember is Love and Death. 1100 lines of blank verse again. Tale of Ruru, who is the son of Rishi Bhrigu, and his beloved Pramadvara. Story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Again, I was talking about Orpheus and Eurydice. The same thing comes up here as well. Miltonic similes, Latin inversion, glimpses of Homer, Virgil, and Dante. What is important for us to note also is that Indian people, I mean, Indian writers were still looking for a particular leeway or a particular trajectory to kind of develop their own writing, let's say, style. They were actually being conflicted between the kind of writings that comes up in Indian ancient literature and the kind of writing that was being written in the continent. I mean, even in Greek literature. I mean, not only at that time, but even during, let's say, times of antiquity. So the same thing comes over here as well. We have Miltonic similes, which is a very contemporary Christian way of writing. There is Latin inversion, again a Christian form of writing, but there is again glimpses of Homer, Virgil, and Dante. So how it plays out very, very. It's a very syncretic way of writing. So one way to understand here is that Indian writers were trying to chalk out a particular dimension on which they could take up Indian writing. That is probably why Indian English writing is still debatable. I don't think it's debatable now, because now Indian English writing has matured a lot, but it was still in its preliminary stages. It was still experimenting with form and style. So probably that is the reason why Indian writing in English had been legitimized uh, while discarding Indian English writing. So the same thing is coming out over here. The next long poem is Baji Prabhu, which deals with the struggle against Mughals. Baji Prabhu was a Maratha chieftain. He struggled against the Mughals. His escape from Panhala to Vishalgarh, valor and strength, all of that has been very well romanticized and idealized in this particular poem. You have Miltonic similes again. Miltonic similes are large similes. I mean, they are almost Christian interpretations of Homeric similes. The way Milton deals with similes in Paradise Lost. They are extensive. Almost takes on 5-6 verses. The same thing. And also he employs heroic verses for this particular poem. Heroic verses also like iambic pentameter and stuff. Yeah. The other poem which is important to remember is Ahana, narration of the dawn goddess, 250 rhymed hexameter couplet, not very long, but nevertheless important. But what is most important, which from coming from Aurobindo Ghosh, is Savitri. It is called to be his magnum opus. It is an epic consisting of 5,000 lines, all written in blank verse. It deals with the story of Satyavan and Savitri. Again, Miltonic similes, a recurrent trope in language. Homeric diction, again a recurrent trope in language. But what is important is he applies Keatsian double adjectives. When you read through Keats's poems, you see that the adjectives they have a certain amount of coloring, a certain amount of it's not just one adjective which is used in Keatsian language. It's almost a qualifier that comes as a precursor to a certain adjective. The same thing he does. I mean, I think you find the same thing in uh, Tennyson and Browning as well to a certain extent. The same thing he does over here. He uses Keatsian double adjectives, a qualifier and an adjective to make the emphasis, on the environmental, let's say, setting, the plot setting more effective. Um, Also, it follows the structure of 12 books. I mean, most of us know that an epic is classically distributed in 12 books. I mean, that becomes a very important parameter for an epic to qualify as an epic. So he does that. He uses this very, very continental division of an epic having 12 particular books. From Aurobindo Ghosh. Now we'll look at his important non-fiction writing. Life Divine, of course, it's highly philosophical. It's on consciousness and divinity. It talks about how spirituality becomes more important than, let's say, hyper nationalism, or just going out and waging a war, or let's say a kind of a battle with the colonial powers and within ourselves, the Indian community. So he becomes, he uses philosophy, he uses Upanishadic philosophy, he uses ways how change comes from within and not just from outside politically. The other important non-fiction writing is called the synthesis of yoga, where it discusses the different yoga marg, the different ways of yoga, karma yoga, dhyan yoga, and all of that, bhakti yoga. So all these become important in a synthesis of yoga. There is a book called the Arya, which deals with literary criticism. There he actually says that whenever we are actually dealing with the Indian language, we should stick to Indian models and not really look at Western models. uh, Maybe it is ironic that he himself employed a lot of Miltonic similes himself, but he actually talks about how India needs to find, the kind of, we say chanda, and that kind of rhythm and rhyme that our ancient scriptures delivered to us. So that is a part of his literary criticism. The Arya is the name of that particular book. The other important text is the Mother. In fact, there is a collection of letters that he addresses to the Mother. But then the mother was no one else but Meera Richard. So most of us would know that there is an ashram in Pondicherry, which is the Aurobindo ashram. Know that this mother figure, Meera Richard, became her apostle over there. Aurobindo was in Pondicherry. He was imprisoned in Pondicherry, which was, I know he escaped to Pondicherry, which was a French occupation at that point of time, but he was imprisoned later. He was in Bengal, Alipur. So the same thing, this Meera Richard becomes his disciple, and later he sees that much of spiritual potential in that particular figure, that he calls him the Mother. So then, it's a collection of letters, collection of, let's say, confessionary writings, where he talks about again spiritual development as such, the idea of moksha, the idea of transformation, so on and so forth. Um, Next, we go to Aryan Tagore, of course, very, very famous Nobel laureate, 1861 to 1941, hailed by Gandhi as the great sentinel. There is a very important collection, very remarkable collection of letters between Gandhi and Aryan Tagore, which is called The Poet and the Prophet, something like that. And you see that both of them had very different positions on the idea of nationalism and internationalism. Aryan Tagore, of course, was a man who followed internationalism more than nationalism. So, anyway, Gandhi respected Tagore a lot, Tagore's way of writing. The only poem, which is very important for us to remember in this regard, is that the only poem that he directly wrote in English is called The Child, which comes out in 1931. All other poems that we get in English from Tagore are essentially translations from his Bengali writings. Most of them he himself translated, but they were all essentially written in Bengali at first and then translated into English. The only poem that was written directly in English is called The Child. Maybe important for your MCQ, 1931. Uh, Other important poetry collections are Gitanjali, also called Song Offerings, 1912, for which, of course, he got the Nobel Prize. The Gardener, 1913. The Crescent Moon, 1913. Fruit Gathering, 1916. Stray Birds, 1916. Lover's Gift and Crossing, 1918. The Fugitive comes out in 1921. What are the themes in Gitanjali? Devotion. I'm here to sing these songs. He says that I'm here to. It's called song offerings, right? Gitanjali. So he's here to kind of gift us certain songs in a lyrical way. So there is this idea of devotion. There is this idea of love, passion, and empathy. All of these play very well in Tagore's writing. Also, divinity becomes a very important part, and divinity doesn't really only mean God. I mean, a very, let's say, a very embodied figure of God. It is a more formless figure of God, which also talks about eternity, it talks about transcendence, it talks about death. All of that is important. He calls about divinity, and there is this particular quote from one of his poems where he talks about divinity as an unbroken perfection. He talks about simple, infinite gifts which comes from the divine. He calls death as the king of the fearful night. And there is another very famous quote from one of his poems, I think lyric 16 or something, I don't exactly remember the lyrics. When I go, let it be the parting word of what I have seen is unsurpassable. So he was, of course, Tagore was a romantic. I mean, for he was an impressionist, he was a romantic, and the same thing happens over here as well. In Gitanjali, he deals with those kind of transcendental themes. He also says that in this playhouse of infinite forms, I have had my play and have seen him that is formless. So again, that kind of that temper, the transcendental temper becomes important. Total, we have some 100 poems in this collection. We have allegory, tropes, allegory, lyric, drama. I mean, drama is not a trope, of course. Dramatic temperament is a trope. The way you kind of chalk out your poems, whenever there is an element of conflict, an element of narratorial conflict, the element of drama comes in between. The idea of lyric, which is subjective, this idea of inquiry, spiritual inquiry, and of course allegory. The next collection that we have is called The Gardener, which deals with the poems of love, almost emulates Robert Browning. Which means, of course, there is a monologic structure as well. This is important for us to remember that, of course, Browning was the inventor, the inventory of dramatic monologue in certain ways. So he follows Browning. The Gardener might be an important piece because he actually deals with a slightly more monologic structure. Otherwise, even in his poems, there is no dialogue, but it is not that dramatic. It has an element of drama, but when we talk about dramatic monologue, of course, drama becomes a much more important, dominant trope. The same thing happens in this particular poetry collection. From intense addiction towards the beloved to self effacement. So, all shades of love have been addressed. Your addiction towards the person you love, your obsession over him or her, and the same thing, to a point where you forget yourself, go beyond yourself to love completely and totally without, let's say, in abundance and without senses. So, this idea of self effacement also plays a vital role in Tagore's romantic love. The other poetry collection is called The Crescent Moon, which deals with sorry, which deals with a romantic view of childhood, which is almost sensual and Wordsworthian in a way, like prelude. Of course, that is the preludes. That's the only Wordsworthian thing that comes into mind right now. But he actually, in the Crescent Moon, he actually sees world from the eyes of a small boy, and the way an adult perceives the world is very different from the way a child perceives the world. I think the same thing is given in this particular. There's a particular play. Uh, I have to look up. There's a particular play where actually there is this character called Amal who actually waits for someone to deliver him a letter, and it is actually God. It's like waiting for Godot in a way, and that letter only comes as through his death. He dies, and it is said that he gets back his letter. It's a very famous drama. I don't know why I'm forgetting its English name, but yeah, that is one thing. The other plays which are important for us to remember is all these are translations, by the way. Chitra, Malini, Red Oleander. Red Oleander is a very famous play. It deals with kind of labor rebellion. It has a socialist intent. It deals with a rebellion taking place when one of the main characters is kind of unjustly he's punished. He's executed. Notir Pujo, Sannyasi, The Cycle of Spring. More or less, his themes are about religion. It is against, let's say, myopic and the narrow let's say, sense of religion, ritualistic religion. But he also talks about spirituality. He was a spiritualist. He did believe in Upanishads and all. So that is one thing which you have to keep in mind. Chitra, I think, is also something. It deals with a woman's passion for a man, and there is this idea of romance that comes in between. Red Orient, as I said, is a very important a play. Notir Puja actually deals with a base woman, to say, a lowly woman who is a dancer, and she falls in love with one of the someone from the princely court, and what kind of fate it kind of invites. So that is about Noti Puja. Sannyasi deals with the spiritual idea of how man looks into the idea of sannyas and whether it's true or wrong. What is real sannyas? That is the content of this particular play. The Cycle of Spring, it is more romantic. It deals with life and death and the kind of different emotions and different phases that we go through in life. So more or less, these are yeah. I mean, the name of that play that I was talking about in Bengali is Dagghar. I think, I don't know, the post office. I think the post office. That is the name of that particular play. Yeah. Anyway, we go to Sarojini Naidu, 1879 to 1949. That is her time. Yeah, she was a member of the Rhymers Club in England. She was educated in England as such. She lived in England for quite some time. So she collaborated with Arthur Symons, again a symbolist poet. Edmund Guzzi, again, he was also a symbolist. She was actually kind of influenced by the Fond de Circle movement, especially symbolism and romanticism. Her important poetry collections, you just have to remember the names. There are not much you can remember, uh, but they are The Bird of Time, The Golden Threshold, The Broken Wing, The Sceptered Flute, Feather of the Dawn. Of course, I haven't mentioned over here, but there are two particular poems which you might look up. One is, of course, the Palanquin Bearers. That's a very famous poem. The other one is called the Indian Weavers. If you go through these poems, you will see that there is a kind of romantic attachment um, towards the people who come from lowly, let's say strata of society, like palanquin bearers, who actually takes a bride from her father's place to father's place, her own house, to the house of her husband. So yeah, what kind of emotions they go through, it's not very subjective, but the kind of jingling sound, a kind of a romanticism that is kind of becomes a part of that. But Indian weavers is much more subjective. It actually delves into the psyche of how weavers are trying to kind of build up clothes for Indians. Of course, when I talk about Indian weavers and this weaving of clothes, we might also relate this to the Gandhian notion of the charka. So there might be an element of rebellion, an element of India being self-independent in different in different ways. So that might be a latent theme as well over there. As I said, she had this romantic longing. All her poems are almost romantic, very symbolic. She deals with a lot of subjective interpretation as such. I mean, even if it's not subjective, like for palanquin bearers, you won't really feel they're very subjective. They are subjective to a certain extent, but you will feel that there is this continuous inquiry about what is truth. Symbolism deals with what is truth in your mind and the associations that you make. So that way it is important. The agrarian themes, of course, weavers, palanquin bearers, all these are agrarian themes. Some of it is a bit Georgian, though Georgian poetry comes up in 1925 to 1935 in Britain after World War. Yeah, hello.
What are agrarian
Yeah,
themes?
so agrarian themes are generally rural themes. See, what happens is when you're dealing with low life, supposedly you're dealing with palanquin bearers, you're dealing with weavers, you're dealing with people who are working in, let's say factories, small factories, cottage industries, people who are working in farms. These are all, you find them all in rural settings. Of course, India didn't really have a lot of, idea of city at that point of time. It didn't really have a metropolitan culture, but you do have a very, very dominant village culture that was at place. I mean, you can relate this to how Gandhi talks about cottage industry and the kind of rural economy that Gandhi, dreamt about. The same thing. For her, it is not the hustle bustle of, let's say, the city life. Something like somewhere like, let's say Calcutta or Bombay or Madras. That those things are not important for her. For her, it was more important to find life in rural areas where people who are actually working on ground, people who actually did not, let's say, who are actually laborers who worked really hard for earning their livelihood. So those are agrarian themes. Um, Georgian poetry, I was talking about that. Georgian poetry actually comes up, I think it was edited by Edward Thomas and Edward Marsh. It comes out in the decade 1925 to 1935 in Britain. So that is much later. Sarojini Naidu, maybe she had been influenced towards the later part of her life, but it's very controversial. I can't comment on it. I don't have any, let's say, evidence. But the point is, Naidu actually she dealt with so many rural themes that it was almost strikingly Georgian poetry was a collection of poems that dealt with a sort of romanticism, not as abstract as Wordsworth and Coleridge, not that kind of romanticism, but something which dealt with human lives in rural settings, something like Thomas Gray writes in Elegy in a Country Churchyard, something like that. It deals with low lives, low ambitions. The same thing is resonated in Sarojini Naidu's writings as well. The next writer, the major writer, of course, that we come across here is Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, 1838 to 1904. Many of us know that he's the one who coined the word Vande Mataram for the Indian national struggle. Uh, in fact, he was a first. I mean, he was the first novelist in English as such. I mean, not only that he wrote his first novel in English, but he was also the first novelist in the entire canon of Indian writing in English. Okay, And that particular, so this is important for your MCQ. And the name of the novel is called Rajmohan's Wife. Comes out in the year 1864. The date is important probably. It was serialized in the in the let's say the what is called, it is a journal of course, called the Indian Weekly. Of course, we do have certain translations of Bankim Chandra's novels, which were written in Bengali but later translated into English. The most popular of both are Anand Mat, of course, where Vande Mataram, that particular thing was written, the song was written, and Devi Chaudhurani. Devi Chaudhurani had a very intense female character, a female protagonist. She was a figure of rebellion. So it's very interesting to see how Bankim Chandra actually allots a lot of space for women characters. Though if you go through his own autobiographical writings, it is debatable if he was really a feminist in one sense or even a proto-feminist. He had very stringent gender roles. But when it comes to his novel, he did, kind of give a lot of space to women characters. Like for Devi Chaudhurani, the woman is the protagonist. So, this is probably a thing that we might note. There is a very, very stark difference between certain fictional writing and non-fictional autobiographies. So that is one thing which is a little curious. Um, One thing I'd missed out when we talked about Torudat, but since we're discussing novel as well, Torudat had a particular novel which was unfinished called Bianca or the Young Spanish Maiden. This is out of context, but I just added it here because this might be important. You never know. Like MCQs are extremely unpredictable, so this might be important. The only novel that she tried at writing, but it remained unfinished primarily because she died at the age of 21, was called Bianca or the Young Spanish Maiden. Now we are actually going towards a chronological phase which is very important in a way. There are three very very important novelists who come almost at the eve of Indian independence. I mean they are very very famous. All these three novelists, Mulk Raj Anand, R.K. Narayan, and Raja Rao. We'll start with Mulk Raj Anand first. His dates are 1905 to 2004. Um, he writes his autobiography, which is called Apology for Heroism, that comes out in the year 1946. You can see there's a major jump. You can see that it is almost at the eve of Indian independence. He grew up. He said that he grew up like most contemporaries, a very superficial, ill-educated young man without any bearings. So that is how he looks back towards his life in his autobiography. He suffered two critical illnesses in his childhood. He was a Punjabi. He was from Punjab. He was into Punjabi activism. You see, Punjab did rebel against the Britishers a lot. There were a lot of military who actually, joined Indian, British services, but later they rebelled. Uh, Migrated to Britain for studies. Avant-garde movements. I mean, he was a part of the small circle avant-garde movements. Also, he was interested in Indian art and left-wing politics. So all these, he had this interest in Indian art and both left-wing international politics in the continent. I mean, in Britain. So that is something which we might remember. 1946, he came back to India and he founded the art magazine called Marg. For your MCQ, it might be important. Um, then he calls his fiction as double burden on his soldiers, on his shoulders. I'm sorry, it's a spelling mistake. It will be shoulders. Alps of European tradition and the Himalayas of the Indian tradition. So basically, again, you see that similar conflict that we saw in Toru in Ramesh Chandra Dutt, and even the pioneers, Michael Madhusudhan Dutt, for that instance, the same thing is playing here as well. And this is quite, it is in the middle of the 20th century. He is writing that his education is essentially Western. He was in Britain. He understood the continental culture much better than Indian culture, but somehow he was interested in Indian art. In Indian, let's say, textual canon. So for him, it was difficult to know what model he will actually employ for his writings. Again, as I said, this is probably one of the major reasons why Indian English was never, given that kind of a canonical place. It was always Indian writing in English. The same thing. There is a search for a model which is originally Indian, and English writing which is originally Indian. That is something which he is searching for here as well. Pardon my spelling mistake. It will be shoulders, not soldiers. Yeah. The most important novel he writes is Untouchable, a very very important novel. Comes out in the year 1935. It deals with a young sweeper whose name is Bakha, from an outcasts colony in a North Indian cantonment town. He goes through a lot of experiences within one day. It actually deals majorly with one day of Bakha's life. almost like how James Joyce writes Ulysses, almost in that way. He has this experience of missionaries who are preaching conversion, because Hindu society was deeply superstitious at that point of time. Gandhi's socialist speeches also becomes a point of redemption. He probably thinks that giving into Gandhi's notions of independence, ahimsa, and satyagraha, all of that might be important to deliver his spiritual and social status. And of course, the problem of sanitization becomes a very, very important theme in this particular novel. I mean, the problem of sanitization has been discussed as recently as this particular decade. So you know very well that at that time sanitization was at its poorest. So that also becomes important. What you see over here is that he is, I mean, Murkraj Anand is actually covering a lot of let's say range of thoughts in this particular novel. He's talking about something which is idealistic, like the Christian doctrine of faith. He's also going to the hardcore, real, pragmatic experience as that of sanitization. So he is covering the entire, the kind of connection between your mind and your body, your mind's thoughts, which is idealistic, your body's, encountering realities. All of that is being covered. So that is a very, very important thing that we can note. Bakha actually thinks of everything which is told to him, but he cannot understand anything. Like, he's not able to understand. Of course, he's illiterate. He's a young sweeper. A very objective portrait has been done. You don't really feel that he's really delving into Bakha's subjective psychoanalytics, or making the entire narration from the protagonist's point of view. It's a third person narrative. So there is an aesthetic distance which is maintained, a very strong current of realism which is employed. The next important novel that we come across is Coolie, 1936. It deals with the story of Munu, who is actually an orphan from the Kangra Hills, who sets out for livelihood, plays various roles, that of rickshaw puller, coolie, domestic servant, factory worker. He meets his tragic death by consumption. Basically, these novels are extremely important in a way. Like, they don't deal with the kind of themes that we saw till now, mythical themes, let's say Indian folklore, those kind of themes. It deals with proper realist experiences of life. It is not escapist. It is dealing with what India was dealing at that time. It was not about the legends and folklore and that kind of let's say a kind of romantic escapism to a certain extent. So that is not there. He's a realist novelist. And this particular novel was much more humanist and sentimental. Untouchable was not that sentimental, it was objective. Coolie was much more sentimental. The other novel that we have to keep in mind is Two Leaves and a Bud, comes out in 1937. It is story of a Punjabi a peasant called Gangu, who works at the tea estate of Assam. So he has migrated to Assam. He's being tortured by the British. The entire, the colonial angle, the torture of very lowly people have been very well documented in this particular novel. And he is shot dead when he tries to resist the rape of his daughter by one of the colonial, officer. So this is very important. The kind of grim reality that India was facing at that time at the hands of British, that has been very well documented. And what is important is that here he is even more sentimental, to the point of being a little corny. So what happens is, we start with something like Untouchable, then we go to Coolie, and then to Two Leaves and a Bud. There is a progression of sentimentality and subjective exploration. It starts from an objective aesthetic distance, but then it slowly becomes subjective. And even all these narratives are third person narratives. These are not first person narratives. Still, the idea of sentimentality kind of becomes very, very dominant towards the latter novels. The other novels which are important to remember is his trilogy. um, the Village, 1939, Across the Black Waters, which comes out in 1941, The Sword and Sickle, 1942. It deals with story of Lal Singh, of course a Punjabi again, who rebels against the village folks. Again, a spelling mistake. He actually is rebelling against the kind of, let's say, the sectarian and narrow ideas that village people generally have. I mean, even conventionally, and more at that time. So he's actually rebelling against that, the kind of that kind of mentality. He wants to actually play a role in the international platform. So he actually goes to Europe to join the British Army for the First World War. He goes to play a more vital international function. He gets imprisoned at the end of the war, and he accepts the communist doctrine. He's attracted towards the communist doctrine, but of course, again, I mean, of course, the liberal countries never took communist doctrine very easily. They took it with a pinch of salt. So he was again in, kind of incarcerated. He was imprisoned, and then he comes back to India. He's confused, he's broken. So it is again having a tragic ending. What is important is that even in almost all novels of Murkraj Anand, you see there is a tragic ending. The ending is never, let's say, it's not only comic, but not only, it's not also reconciliatory. It's always tragic in a way. The Big Heart is another important novel, 1945. It deals with the story of a coppersmith who actually, kind of promotes machinery, use of machinery in industry, talks about modernity, but then he falls a victim to his own fellow villagers. The villagers they actually slaughter him at the end of the novel. Again, a very tragic end. But what is important again to see is that all these characters are lowly characters. None of them are elitist. Be it Munu or be it Gangu, be it Lal Singh, be it this coppersmith, all of them are very very low characters who come from the labor strata of society. Of course, other important novels, which is not very important, just a minor important novel might be The Old Man and the Cow, 1960. Magic realism. I've just kept it because it deals with magic realism, so that might be important. I think Mulkraj Anand uses magic realism in only one novel of his, and that is this particular novel. It is about his man's choice between his wife and a cow. So what happens is he actually chooses his cow over his wife. So that the myth of Sita, of Ram leaving Sita because of his, let's say his kingdom in Ayodhya. The same myth has been recreated, and this time it is the contention between his own wife, the Sita figure, and a cow. So it is full of irony, of course. But again, that is again a part of Indian reality. So yeah, the next important writer we come across over here is R.K. Narayan, 1906 to 2001. His writings are extremely again realist. All these three writers are extremely realist. That is why they're very important. But for R.K. Narayan, more than Mulkraj Anand, there is a bit of humor, which makes R.K. Narayan probably a better writer. I mean, for audiences, not only in the literary dimension, but even otherwise. Mulkraj Anand had a lot of sentimentality, which becomes a little problematic for many people at the end. But R.K. Narayan even uses Indian grim realities with a sense of humor. There is this idea of deep irony, which runs parallel to R.K. Narayan's works. Also, there is an idea of quiet sympathy that he actually uses to kind of portray his characters. If you read his novels, you will see that there is an element of sympathy that plays through. There is sympathy, but there is not sentimentality. So that is a fine job that R.K. Narayan does. Of course, the most important writing, one of his most important writings is Swami and Friends, 1935. It is a story of a boy in his childhood. It deals with his pranks, it deals with the punishments he faces, village life, humorous episodes, adventures, ironies of village, almost like Tom Sawyer in a way. But the point is, it deals with realism. It deals with how life is in a village at the time of independence, before independence, 1935. So that is what is important. He's a realist again. The Bachelor of Arts, which comes out in 1937, the character's name is Chandran. He's a Western educated man who finds difficulty, spelling mistake again, difficulty in understanding Indian marriage and Western notions of love. He turns a saint and returns home to accept his parents' will. So what happens in this novel is that this person goes abroad to, kind of get educated. He feels romantic longing for Westerners, and he feels that Western notion of romance is much more attractive than the Indian notion of marriage. So that becomes important over here. He almost um, just a second. Yeah, all right. Yeah. So what happens over here is that for him, this Indian notion of arranged marriage, let's say, parents choosing a woman for you or choosing a man for you, that becomes problematic. He becomes attracted towards that Western notion of individual romance. So that becomes important in this. Again, you see the clash of the Western and Indian civilization. Again, that particular perpetual theme is being repeated. He becomes a saint. I mean, that is very comic in a way. Like he turns a sadhu just to escape from this, conflict, and then he returns home to accept his parents' will. What is important is, he gets married to the woman his parents decide him to marry. But what is actually funny is that the way R.K. Narayan stops his novel, he actually doesn't show that his character becomes a rebel figure. He concedes defeat at the end. Now this is very ambiguous to note whether R.K. Narayan himself was a person who believed in Indian ethos more than Western ethos, or it was just that he was showing the reality of Indian life where people could not escape the tentacles of, let's say, the kind of orthodox civilization that we had or still have in certain ways. So that is ambiguous, but none of the characters, even you see in the later novels, none of the characters actually become a rebel figure, which is very which is a little ambiguous and curious. Next novel, which is important, is The Dark Room, 1938. Triangular love between a woman named Savitri, her husband, and the other woman, Shantabai. The same thing, triangular love. Even here, Savitri knows that her husband is actually cheating on her, and she gets really offended. But she does not go out. She caters to her husband and stays back in the house. Again, the same thing. The woman doesn't become a rebel figure. So again, that curious point comes. We might think of that curious point. Other important novels, The Financial Expert, 1952, story of a young lender, Margaya, and his dreams of finances and the inevitable crash. So Margaya is a character who lends loans to people. He actually makes a huge business with a partner, Dr. Lal, I think. He's called Dr. Lal, and that is a pornographic business, but that is kind of revealed in the society in the town that he lives in, and it is banned, and his entire finances crash. This is a very comic novel, no, but it is tragic for Margaya as a character, but the way it is portrayed, it has a lot of comic elements. Of course, the most important novel, The Guide, I think many of us probably know it. It has been adapted into a film as well. Sahitya Academy Award. It got its Sahitya Academy Award in 1958. It is the story of a guide called Raju. His affair with a homemaker who turns dancer. Rosie. I mean, Raju is the one who actually helps Rosie turn into a dancer, going against her own husband, and the consequences that follow. Raju is, I mean, the novel, it has a very, let's say, it has a lot of complicated timeline. It has a flashback technique. It goes front and then comes back. And you see that Raju actually at the start of the novel, he's a saint. He comes out of a jail, he becomes a saint. He's not a saint. I mean, he tries to become a saint just to earn his livelihood. But that changes his life. Towards the end of the novel, you see there is a very a moment of pathos where Raju actually, he actually tries to perform the real role of the saint, where the villagers, trust him to, be, one of those messiahs for them, bringing down the rains. So that's a very wonderful novel if you read it. The Man-Eater of Malgudi, 1952, retelling of the story of Bhashmashura, again an epical, legendary character who was granted boon to reduce to ashes anyone he touched on the head. So this is the main, let's say, epical theme or mythic theme that he takes up. He recycles it into modern day perspective through the character of someone called Vasu, who is a taxidermist, and he kills himself while trying to killing an elephant. He tries to shoot an elephant and he kills himself at the end. The same thing that Bhashmashura did to himself. He burnt himself down. So that is again that is a very curiously important novel. Um, Waiting for Mahatma is important because this is the only novel, by the way, where Mahatma Gandhi actually features as a historical figure and a reference. So that might be important for your MCQ. This is the only novel where Mahatma Gandhi plays, let's say, an important, not an important, but a significant figure. It deals with the freedom struggle. That is the backdrop of the novel. It is a story of a Congress volunteer, a woman called Bharti, and a weak-willed hero called Sri Ram. Okay, and Gandhi, of course, appears as a historical figure. At the end, we see that how Sri Ram and Bharti actually kind of look into their own romantic relationship, and Gandhi probably it ends with Gandhi's death, probably. His assassination. So this is an important novel which deals with Indian freedom struggle, romance, and the Gandhian ideology. The Vendor of Sweets, 1962, deals with a sweet vendor called Mali and his marriage to a Western girl. The same point, a person falling in love with a Western woman and then facing conflict in his own society. The same, this perpetual conflict that I was talking about right from the start. You see, it is plaguing even 20th century, mid 20th century fiction. Raja Rao, the third of the lot, 1908 2006. Kanthapura, 1938. Directly, it talks about the Gandhian age, Gandhian freedom struggle. It depicts a South Indian village during the 1930s where he actually documents, through fiction, the reaction to Gandhian thought. So if you read the novel, you will see that there are people in the particular village who are completely apathetic. They don't feel anything when they hear Gandhi, but they only become convinced that they should follow Gandhi when there are people from the Congress who tell them that Gandhi is, he follows that lineage of the avatars, the incarnations, the Hindu incarnations. When they say that Gandhi is the modern avatar who is actually here to deliver us from our slavery, like colonial slavery, that is when they actually take Gandhi seriously. So there is an element of humor, there is an element of deep-rooted superstition, call it the belief system, from a more positive, viewpoint, that actually runs through this particular novel. You see the oral narrative. If you read ancient Sanskrit texts, the Hindu philosophy, they are mostly oral. So the way this particular book has been written, you feel like you're reading some kind of narration. It's not a proper self-conscious literary piece. It's more like a oral narrative that you're reading through. Almost it is documented by chance. It's something like that. The technique is very important. It got the Sahitya Academy Award in 1963, which is it was written in 1938, by the way, but it got its award in 1963. So look at the difference in the years, the gap. Yeah. The Serpent and the Rope, 1953. It is a story of Ramaswamy, again, who falls in love with a foreigner called Madeline, and then he meets another Cambridge-educated Indian girl with complete Indian ethos. I mean, of course, Indian ethos. I mean, that is you have to understand what Indian ethos is properly. So he actually decides to go for Savitri while I mean leaving Madeline. So again, that same notion which was there in both especially in R.K. Narayan and even a little bit in Mumtaz Anand. The same thing is here as well. And also, by the way, the serpent of the rope is actually a reference to the philosophy of Shankaracharya. He says that when you have a proper guru, you can see that the jiva is with the jiva is the Shiva. So when you see without direction, you see it's a rope. But when you have the proper direction, you see it's a serpent. So here, maybe since Ramaswamy did not have the proper vision, according to Raja Rao, he thought Madeline is the suitable wife, the wife figure for him. But later, when he actually understood Indian ethos deeply, he opted for Savitri. Now it is for you to decide how Raja Rao enacts his belief system. So that is one point. The other important novel is Comrade Kirillov, 1976. It's a very modern novel in that way. It deals with a character called Kirillov and his opinions on the British, warfare, the First World War, Second World War, communism, Cold War that was happening at that point of time. So the date is 1976. USSR and USA, they were actually at loggerheads at their peak. So that is the time he's writing his novel. He also talks about Indian independence, Indian development, all of that. So that would be important because it actually deals with a fiction piece of writing which tends to emulate non-fiction. So that way, this novel might be important for your MCQ. It is a fiction, but it has it kind of mimics a non-fiction way of writing. Also, this particular novel was first published in French and then it was translated in English. So again, important for MCQ. It was not written, I mean, published in English at the first. It was published in French, later published in English. So this is something which you might note down. Now I'll be going a little fast because we are going into the age of modernism. There is not much to actually detail about, but there are certain names which we might remember. And generally, the kind of MCQ questions that come, I think, even at JNU and in the net examination, are more objective. I mean, very objective. We don't need to know everyone's biography in detail over here. But certain names and certain names of anthologies are important. One is Pilal. He founded the New Poetry Society in Calcutta in 1958, 1957. He founded in 1957, but his anthology, which was published as Modern Indo-Anglian Poetry, comes out in 1958. One thing you might note that towards the beginning of this, presentation, we had Anglo-Indian poetry. Now we have Indo-Anglian poetry. So there's idea of Indianness that actually becomes very important after India gets its independence. This comes out in 1958. So they are taking up the language English, but they're not actually divorcing Indian ethos. India becomes sacrosanct in the in the literary imagination. That is important for us to remember. Nizam Ezekiel, many of us have kind of heard about him. He writes this poetic collection called A Time to Change, 1952. You just have to remember the names of the anthologies. These might be important. A Time to Change, 1952. 60 poems, 1953. The Third, 1959. Unfinished Man, 1959. The Exact Name, 1960. Hymns in Darkness is quite important. That's a very famous anthology. I think it came. I think in one of these net examinations as well. So 1976. That is important. He called himself a refugee of spirit. He finds himself in one lunatic asylum or otherwise in a deserted holy place. So you can see the kind of idiosyncrasy that he has. He either feels he's mad, he has gone mad, or he feels he has become as peaceful as a saintly figure. So we don't have the conflict of civilizations, but we do have the conflict of spirits. So conflict nevertheless perpetuates. The themes of alienation, Indian societal hypocrisy, existential inquiry, that becomes more important. Though, I mean, existential inquiry was present in the tradition till now, but it was from a more spiritual bent of mind. Now it is more from a, let's say, existential inquiry. And if you see the timeline in the continent, existentialism, Camus, Kafka, all of them were writing during the 1940s and 50s. Existentialism, it kind of it became it as it came of age as a response to the Second World War, to be honest. So you see that existential inquiry is being kind of imported or affected in Indian modern poets as well. Of course, his most famous. There are two poems which are very famous. One is Night of the Scorpion. I think many of us have read it. The other one is Enterprise. Both these poems are quite important. You might just look up. Next we have Kamala Das. Just a second. Yeah. Next we have Kamala Das. Her date has been given 1934 2009. Her original name is Madhavi Kutti. She's a feminist poet. She writes feminist poetry. She calls herself a flesh and bone and resistance. She talks about sexual desires and intimacy quite openly. In fact, if you go through her biography, you will see that she had um, divorced her husband and she had publicly accepted multiple lovers. She said that I cannot, belong to one person. I need sexual freedom. So that is one thing that you can understand. She has a very radical approach towards the body and body politics. Her important poems are "In Love," "The Freaks." "The Freaks" is an important poem. This is important for your net also. "The Suicide," an important poem. "The Looking Glass," "The Maggots," "Relationship," "The Dance of the Unachals." So she also deals with gender politics. He thinks that men who oppress women are actually nothing but eunuchs. So that is what is very well depicted in that particular poem, the dance of the eunuchs. The freaks deals with exclusive sexual longing. It is very very overt. The suicide deals with the kind of mental stress that she goes through. I mean, that women go through in their relationships with men and the domination that they face. So more or less, she falls into the trajectory of proper feminist poetry in India. If I'm not sure if this for the first time, but she becomes a very very important figure when we talk about Indian feminism. Arun Kolatkar, many of us might know him. She writes the Jejuri Poets, had been awarded the Commonwealth Prize in 1976. Jejuri, in fact, has been called by Arun Kolatkar as a depiction of the Indian Westland. So, I mean, I'm of course relating to Eliot's idea of Westland in the West. He calls Jejuri poems as a depiction of the Indian Westlands. The other important poetic collection is a Low Temple collection of poems. Importantly, he used pen names, pseudonyms like Chirmiri, Bhichki, etc. He wrote in Marathi, by the way. So he used those kind of pseudonyms for his writings. And in the Jejuri poems, I mean, there are two or three poems that I remember, and over there he actually depicts the kind of let's say class bias that perpetuates in our society, the caste problems that is still there in our society. Of course, at that time it was even more prevalent. The kind of problem that a old woman faces, the kind of elitism that is a part of Indian society, where people talk about helping other people, but philanthropy doesn't really actually materialize. It is all about apathy and looking, kind of away from the poorer sections, the deprived classes. So Arun Kolatkar is an important poet that way. Adil Jusawala, his poetic collection Land's End, 1962, The Missing Person, 1974. Um, Importantly, he again, you see the Western Indian, if not conflict, that confrontation is there again. Achilles coming, I mean, in the second poem, I mean, the missing person. It's a poem actually. It is a collection, but it has an eponymous poem as well, where Achilles actually comes to meet Vidura in India. Vidura is a character of Mahabharata, and Achilles, of course, the Trojan War and stuff. So he actually comes over here and he meets Vidura, and Vidura actually talks about why Mahabharata took place and what are the similarities between Trojan War happened because of a woman again. I mean, it was because of a woman's character becomes central in the Trojan War as much as in Mahabharata. Even Draupadi, I mean, she becomes the reason why Mahabharata actually happened. The warfare happened. So that woman angle is also present, by the way, in this particular in these narratives, right? So Helen of Troy and Draupadi. Over here we find A.K. Ramanujan, again a very important poet. The Striders, 1966, the interior landscape. Speaking of Shiva, by the way, he actually confess that he is a practicing Hindu and he believes in Hindu spirituality, if not, I mean, of course, not bigotry, but spirituality. And he says that he believes in Hindu folklore, Hindu religious ethos. Also, he juxtaposes Hindu religious ethos, let's say the lofty spiritual understanding philosophy that Hindu philosophy has, with the kind of degradation that Hindu society has undergone over the years, over centuries. So he actually juxtaposes what is truth and what can be true, what should have been true. So that juxtaposition, that conflict plays through Ramanujan's writings. His important poems are River. Again, many of us might have read it. Christmas, and in the particular poem Christmas, he actually talks about Indians of all religions coming together and celebrating Christmas, not only as a birth date of Jesus Christ, but also as a festival for Indians. So that secular ethos is celebrated in Christmas. Some Indian uses of history on a rainy day. Again, he looks into Indian ethos, Hindu spirituality, and how Hindu society has not been able to live up to that expectation. Snakes, bearded fish, to be bearded fish, the opposable thumb. All of this more or less deal with pantheism, or the kind of finding God and spirituality in a fish, or in the kind of actions that we do. So all these are important for A.K. Ramanujan. So his social critique is essentially spiritualist. He is a he does social critique very trenchantly, but he is also into spiritual ethos. That is something. I mean, I'm just relating these thematic backgrounds because tomorrow, if you get a question on, let's say, spiritual ethos or this kind of a thing, you might, guess that Ramanujan might be the better figure who can actually take up social critique through spiritual ethos. So, for your guesswork, these themes might be important. Um our Parthasarathi, very important. She is a Tamil, by the way, and he talks about the relationship between his Tamil mind and Europe. Again, a conflict between the Tamil civilization and the European civilization. He says that I share an uneasy relationship with my own, mother tongue Tamil because of English, but he was, born. I mean, in the sense, he was educated in England, though he was born and brought up to a certain, I mean, to a certain age in Tamil Nadu. Right. He has this rough passage. His poems are, I mean, his poetic collection is called the Rough Passage. That's the only significant poetic collection that he has. But he talks about the poems that and the themes that he talks about are exile, trial, homecoming. So if you go through these names of these three poems, you will understand that there is an idea of alienation, an idea that I'm exiled. I'm not being a part of that, that cultural mainland or cultural heart where I should be. So this ambivalence between Western culture, Western education, and the Tamil identity, that becomes a very important part over here. Exile, trial, homecoming, all three have almost similar resonances. Rough Passage itself is, it is in a way a poetry collection of uh, poems that deal with the notions of exile. Another essay that he talks about, I mean, where he critiques the Western continental culture, is Hoarding After the English Gods. He says that we have, mimicked him to a certain extent where we have lost our own identity now. So that is important. We have Pritish Nandi, another poet of exile. He also talks about, you know, about a very hybrid identity from where he cannot understand where he actually can locate himself. Um, of Gods and Olives, 1967. Tonight, This Savage Right, uh, that is a particular poem which is very important. He deals with violence. He talks about partition. In most of his poems, you have mention of partition, the violence, the death, the sex, the kind of taboos that plague Indian society, the myths of India, which again he juxtaposes with the reality of India, and the colorfulness that Indian, mythic societies have. I mean, the kind of, let's say the kind of events, the eventful myths that we have. So he cherishes them, but he also looks at the negative aspects of it, like violence, like societal hypocrisy, things like that. A very, I mean, two important poems is like Calcutta, you must exile me. That is one particular poem which is important. Another poem is near Deshapriya Park. That is a place in Kolkata, I mean, in Calcutta anyway. But then you can understand that the theme of exile perpetuates here as well. Again, we have K.N. Daruwala, who has a poetic collection called Under Orion, 1970. Apparition in April 1971, Crossing of Rivers, 76. His themes are religion, death, anarchy, desire. So he actually talks about the loss of religion. That was a common taboo when you cross a river or a sea. So he talks about that. He talks about social superstitions. He talks about the anarchy in human minds, where people do not know what fascism is and what actual democracy means in India. So all that actually becomes an important point in his poems. It's slightly political. Important poems are Evangelical Eva. You see, the religious temperament is very well intact. Rotarian Renu, the waterfront. The waterfront deals with the superstitions. All these are, they deal with basically religion, superstition, latent desire, suppressed desire, anarchy, all of that. Jayanta Mahapatra, of course, he's a poet from Orissa. He talks about Odisha as a state, its lush greenlands, its temples. He actually talks about those kind of social settings, but he also talks about modernity and sex. So he has this longing towards Odisha, its temple culture, but he also talks about modernity, sex, sexual liberation. So he is actually quite amorphous in that way. Important poetry collections: Close the Sky, 10 by 10, 1971; Waiting, 1979; Relationship, 1980, which also got the Sahitya Academy Award; The False Start, 1980. These are four important poetry collections which you might try to remember. Now I'll just look at some novelists and I'll just draw this to an end. You have V.S. Naipaul, 1932 to 2018. He's a major novelist whose novels have the quality of travelogue. So V.S. Naipaul, if you read through his novels, you will feel that it's less of fiction and more of travel writing. He's so rigorous with his portrayal of the lands he visits. Important novels in the Free State, 1971, got Booker Prize, so might be important. Booker Prize, 1971, in the Free State. The Mimic Men, 1967, he talks about Indians who kind of mimic the colonial culture. So that way it is important. The Loss of El Dorado, 1970. India, a wounded civilization. He thinks that India is still under colonial rule mentally, at least, and India is still to kind of rise from its days of gloom. It is yet to find its cultural nationalism. And V.S. Naipaul, in fact, believed in cultural nationalism to a certain extent. So that comes up in 1977. A very important novel, which from where you might just get questions, is A House for Mr. Biswas. It talks about, it is set in the Caribbean, by the way. V.S. Naipaul was brought up in the Caribbean, though he was an Indian. Many Indian laborers actually migrated to the Caribbean lands at that point of time. So his story is about of Mohan Biswas and his search for identity. Basically, Mohan Biswas is a character who is oppressed by his parents. Like, he doesn't get the independence that he deserves. There is some oracle that has been at place, that, I mean, astrological oracle, that he will actually be the cause of his father's death, which comes true. So his mother hates him even more. Later he marries, and then his wife dominates him. He lives with his in-laws, and later he tries to erect his own house. And this erection of his own house becomes the objective correlative of his own, let's say, self-worth and self-independence. So this is the story, more or less. That is 1961, a very important novel. Shashi Deshpande, she's probably still living. I don't know if she's living. I have to find out. I think she's living. Yeah. The Dark holds no terrors, a matter of time. Mainly, she deals with human relationships and gender concerns. Not a very important writer, but you might remember her name if you get an option. But she's not very significant till now. Other novelists who might be significant, just have a look through them when you sit for your examination. Salman Rushdie, of course, most of us know Satanic Verses, the novel which created so much of stir. Midnight's Children, adapted into a film, employs magic realism, talks about Indian partition and different Indian, children taking birth in different places in India and even in abroad. And the kind of, if you see the movie also, or if you read the novel, you will see it's beautiful. It is from a child's perspective who grows up, falls in love. There is Bangladesh's War of Independence. All of that becomes a central part of this novel. Imaginary Homelands, that is another important novel. Around and a Sea of Stories is a novel which was written in response to the ban that he faced when Satanic Verses faced that kind of stir. So Satanic Verses actually faced a lot of censorship. And at that point, he wrote Around and a Sea of Stories, where the major theme was that there is a character called Haraun who is a storyteller, and now he cannot speak, and he goes into a sea which is which is actually thought to have the treasure from where he will get back his oratory skills, from where he will get back his ideas of narrating stories. So he gets back and he actually unearths that place from where stories can be spoken about or narrated without fear or favor as such. So that was a very, it was a very slant reaction to Satanic Verses. And again, magic realism becomes an important totem in this particular novel as well. Vikram Seth, An Unsuitable Boy. It's a rather long novel, but it deals with, it is it is nice, but it's very long, some 700, 800 pages. But it is an important novel. At least know the name. I mean, if you don't know the content, The Golden Gate, again, it's an important novel. It deals with the clash of India and America. Again, it deals with America and India, and the problems that Indians face when they are in America with respect to their identity and equal music. Another important novel, though I don't know much about it. Rohinton Mistry, of course, but his famous novel is A Fine Balance. Fine Balance is important because it deals with the age of emergency. 1976, Indira Gandhi, that kind of emergency, and it also deals with certain sections of social societal critique like class-based elitism, caste-based discrimination. All of that is very well portrayed. Even the idea of vasectomy and tubectomy, which became a controversial point during Indira Gandhi's diktat, that population has to be reduced. That also becomes a very important theme in this particular novel. A World of Difference, Such a Long Journey, not very important novels, but you might just remember the names. Niraj C. Chaudhary is an important name. He writes the autobiography of an unknown Indian, which actually glorifies British rule and thinks that India is not a very developed country or a culture to know what independence really means. Ironically, he has been, I mean, not ironically, sarcastically, he has been called to be the last of the brown sahibs. So he is a person who loves British culture. He doesn't really look upon Indian culture in a very good way. Amrita Pritam, of course, she's also a poet. You might have heard about her. She received the ticket and all. She's a famous poet and all. But her most important novel is Pinjar, which is Cage. So that is important for us to remember at least the name. Uh, Next, Kiran Desai. Of course, she's a very important figure. Kulabolu in the Guava Orchard and The Inheritance of Loss. The Inheritance of Loss actually got the Booker Prize in 2006, if I'm not wrong. It's a beautiful novel. It deals with colonial culture, Indian Babu culture, and also how there is a conflict within. I mean, it deals with North Bengal also to a certain extent, and it deals with how ethnicities also clash in India. Like India is not a homogeneous society, so the problems of being in a heterogeneous society, facing colonial rule, there is a character of a grandfather who is still in that colonial era, doesn't want to accept Indian independence, thinks it is not really a very good thing for India politically. So all those notions are explored in this particular novel. Anita Desai, of course, Cry the Peacock, Voice in the City, Bye Bye Blackbird, Fire on the Mountain, Where Shall We Go This Summer? Fire on the Mountain is a little important because I think she got her Shahitya Academy for it. I'll just check it. Um, I think she got a Shahitya Academy, probably Shahitya Academy for it because she never got a Booker Prize. Probably she got a Shahitya Academy for it. Fire on the Mountain. It deals with a woman who actually has been, who has actually lived in India of Orthodox values. She has a son, but his son is Western educated, and he leaves his mother because of that Orthodox mentality that his mother has. And she dies alone, and she becomes a very, very, very tragic figure at the end. Though she was wrong, I mean, in her value system, but she becomes a tragic figure nevertheless. You can sympathize with her character. So that is one important novel that you might remember. uh, Even Cry the Peacock is actually a novel that deals with superstitions, with astrology, with the kind of accidents that happen and which coincides with an astrological narration probably, and how that takes a toll in Indian life. So it also deals with superstitions to a certain extent. Voices in the City deals with certain characters who are translocating from the United States to Kolkata, like in Bengal, and how even their identity is always at flux. They do not know how to actually know what kind of identity actually suits them, the Western one or the Indian one. So that again becomes an important novel here as well. um, yeah, and Bye Bye Blackbird is actually exactly the opposite. In Bye Bye Blackbird, what happens is there are two characters who actually migrate from India to London, and there they face second class citizen, that kind of treatment, and they are unable to kind of find livelihood. But though later they emerge triumphant, but that is exactly the opposite of Voices in the City. So mainly she has a diasporic strain of writing as well. I mean, she has a diasporic bent of mind. Um of course, now I'll just, I think this is the last, yeah. So these are the dramatists that we deal with to end our presentation with. One is Vijay Tendulkar. I mean, these three particular playwrights, Vijay Tendulkar, Badal Sarkar, and Girish Karnad, most of them they wrote in their own regional languages. Badal Sarkar in Bengali, Girish Karnad in Kannad, and Vijay Tendulkar in Marathi. But what happens is all of their writings, most of their writings were translated in English, and they are the pioneers of Indian drama coming of age. Indian modern drama coming of age is being heralded by these three figures. So you need to know their names and certain plays for greater safety. One is, of course, Vijay Tendulkar, Silence, the Court is in Session. It's a beautiful narrative. I mean, if you go to the play where there is a woman who is inducted of adultery. I mean, sorry. I mean, she's spoken. I mean, she's incriminated of adultery. She is actually silenced by everyone in the court. There's a mock court session, by the way. It's not a proper court. There's a mock court session that takes place, and she is silenced, and she's not given the space to breathe. So that becomes important. It talks about the experience of women in modern Indian society. Shukharam Binder, a friend story. It deals with again the complications of life in Mumbai and the kind of problems that the kind of corporate culture that comes along and the kind of search for longing. All of that becomes an important part in Sakharam Binder as well. Badal Sarkar and Indrajit. This is a very important play which actually deals with the process of writing itself. It deals with a writer who is trying to write a particular play but he's unable to write. So he actually tries to concentrate on the audiences he faces and he tries to write about their lives from his imagination but he's unable to. So that entire painful process of writing, how to write, that entire process of writing has been brilliantly depicted in this particular play called And Indrajit. Mad Horse is about it is about a sexual affair of a woman with a man, and where I mean the woman character actually at the end she doesn't actually deny her sexual fantasies. She talks about it loudly, and that is what is actually the sexual fantasies has been compared to the mad horse. It's like a horse that goes on galloping. So that is another brilliant play. Girish Karnad, you have Hayavardhana and Tughlaq. Tughlaq deals with the reign of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, the fictional portrayal of it, and it shows that how Tughlaq was a secularist. He believed in secular ethos, but he was cheated by many of his close friends. The cause of his let's say the his rather uneven mood and temperament. All that has been brilliantly portrayed. But Tughlaq, he emerges as a heroic figure at the end. He becomes mad. I mean, at the end of the drama, he becomes mad. But it is, I mean, it's a rather empathetic portrayal of Tughlaq. However, Dana is based on an epic and it has I mean, sorry, of a myth, and it is followed by another play called Nagamandala. Both of them, I think, are based on myths. And however, Dana it talks about it comes from a myth where the heads of a particular. I mean, there are two men who love a particular woman, and the woman loves one character from each man, and somehow she asks for this boon that let their body and heads get exchanged so that I get the perfect man, and that is where problem starts. So this is about that particular play. It is humorous, but it also deals with the greed and ambition of men and the loss of identity. All of that is important even in this particular play. Mahesh Dattani, who is again another important dramatist. When we look at queer theater, Mahesh Dattani, I just included him because he's a very important Indian queer, theater artist. I mean, playwright. Um, uh, Tara is actually a play. I mean, the names of the play is Tara, Dance Like a Man, Bravely Fought the Queen, Do the Needful, Final Solution, Seven Steps Around the Fire. Tara is important because it deals with treatment. It doesn't have a queer perspective. It deals with the treatment of a girl. I mean, there is Siamese twins who are born, and the man is given much more preference to an extent where the kind of organs that Tara had at her birth is also given to the man. This actually calls for Tara's guilt, and I think the other character, the man, he actually goes to London, takes on a new identity, and repents his entire life about his sister. So that is Tara. It's a very very empathetic portrayal. Dance Like a Man is about a couple who loves dancing. It deals on a man who loves dancing. I mean, his wife actually excels in dancing, but the kind of dance he does is not accepted by society, like Indian dance. So it deals with kind of masculine politics, what masculinity is, what is the image of masculinity. So all that is important. Bravely Fought the Queen. That is another important play where this is actually it is from a female perspective, but it also deals with how bisexuality and cheating, hidden lives become a part in many marital Indian lives. I mean, there are a lot of instances in his particular place where there is a man who has a wife, but he's bisexual and he's more actually attracted towards another man. So how that ruins a marital relationship and how a man is forced to live double lives. So that becomes an important point even in Bravely Fought the Queen. Do the Needful. out and out it deals with homosexuality. There are a man and a wife gets married when their parents pressurize them to, I mean, it's an arranged marriage of course, but the woman loves a man who is from a different faith, and the man loves another man of course, and both talk to each other and they feel doing the needful is to getting married in face of the society, but actually going after their own romantic ambitions. Final solutions, that is, it deals with communal politics, it deals with a Hindu Muslim riot, and how at the end of it both Hindus and Muslims are unable to reach out to each other, and why we have riots and misunderstandings, factionalism in society. So it deals with that. Seven Steps Around the Fire deals with, I mean, the protagonist. I won't say the protagonist, but the central character is a transgender who is married to a man, and the man is the son of a particular politician. And this transgender, when the politician finds out that his son loves this transgender person, uh, she is set on fire and murdered, and how that the entire, this narrative is kind of covered up in media and through political power. That is actually that is at focus. More or less I've completed all the major writers. One or two writers you might still look up if you have time. One is Amitav Ghosh, though he has a lot of diasporic, he is generally classified as a diasporic writer, but nevertheless he can be included in the Indian tradition. Another one is Jhumpa Lahiri. Jhumpa Lahiri is completely diasporic, but you might just look up because there is a particular novel that has come out recently. I think it's called Whereabouts, where Jhumpa Lahiri has written that in Italian at first and then translated it into English. So that might be important for your MCQ. It's a little odd. So just look up Amitav Ghosh. It's not very difficult. The names of the novels, and Jhumpa Lahiri if you want to, if you have time. So I think by that I take my presentation to an end, and I invite questions, comments, observations, whatever.
Great session. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Any questions where, or if you have any idea, I mean, any confusion of how to approach, the kind of questions that can come from Indian section, you might just ask. Okay, someone asked me the movie name for the guide. It is the guide, I think. The movie is called the guide. Okay. Right. So was it understandable, more or less? I hope I did not go very fast. I tried to keep it short, but yeah. Thank you. Do we need to read the summaries for some of the important books like we did for Shakespeare and Dryden? I think, see, if you, the problem is most of the Indian important text, you do get summaries, but there are many others for which you do not get summaries on Wikipedia or other websites. So that is a problem. But if you do find summaries, it's always good to have a look. I mean, why I'm saying this is because for Indian, I haven't seen people actually asking questions which ask you the name of the characters or such. It is not that deep, but they do ask you on the themes. So if you can just go to the plot, you probably will remember the theme better. So that way, if you have time, always go to the summary. Even for your net examination, going to the summary is always helpful. There is something called optical memory. The more you go through summaries, the more you look at a particular novel and its characters, the more you remember. Optical memory is the strongest. So could you please suggest for studying literature? There is a book by M.K. Nayak. In fact, I actually followed that particular book during my college, my UG days. Though I think there is a different edition, I think published by now. So that will be a more latest edition. The book is a history of Indian writing, a history of Indian English literature by M.K. Nayak, and it is. Wait, just a second. I just see Shahitya Academy's book. It is published by Shahitya Academy itself. The writer is M.K. Nayak. See, the point is, this is a very doubtful thing to answer, because even for British or Irish or any kind of world literature, they might ask you authors or poets who are very recent. But the point is, they generally do not ask such difficult questions. I mean, they will ask you, they will just see if you have a concept of modern Indian literature, the names I tried to cover, they are the major writers, and a bit on pre-independent writers like Todu Dutt and the Aryan Tagore and those kind of writers mainly. R.K. Narayan and all, they are important. But I don't think they will actually ask you names of very recent writers. But it is always good to know. I mean, as a literature student, it's always good to be, to know what is happening and what kind of books are coming out. That is okay, but I don't think that will come for your examination. I have never faced it in my own whenever I took examinations. I've never faced it. Any other question? Has the examination date been announced by now for the JNUE for English? Okay, okay. 20th September. All right. Okay, then if there are no more questions, then I would ask the AISA representative to kind of intervene. Sure, sure. Thank you, everyone.